Welcome to the Cinematic Explainer. Today, we are diving headfirst into the dark, invisible architecture that actually drives global conflict. We are going to completely set aside the day-to-day headlines, and we're even going to ignore the big personalities of individual leaders. Instead, we're looking at the massive structural forces at play on the world stage. I'm so excited to guide you through this because I promise you, once you see the world through this specific lens, the entire history of warfare and, honestly, the future of global power starts to make a chilling kind of sense.
So, let's start with a massive paradox. Think about it. Why on earth do nations that trade billions of dollars with each other, negotiate treaties, and cooperate on huge global issues still frantically prepare for war? We live in this era of unprecedented global wealth. Our economies are totally interconnected. We have all these international institutions, and yet, right beneath that shiny veneer of cooperation, the world's most powerful nations are continuously churning out stealth bombers, nuclear submarines, and hypersonic missiles. Are these countries just inherently evil? Or is there something fundamentally tragic about the system they're forced to operate in?
To figure this out, we have to turn to a pretty grim but absolutely groundbreaking framework. It's laid out in the book, The Tragedy of Great Power Politics by political scientist John J. Mearsheimer. This gives us a deeply analytical, data-rich answer to why lasting global peace is basically an illusion. You know that optimistic idea that the end of the Cold War meant the end of great power competition? Well, Mearsheimer totally demolishes that. Instead, he shows us exactly why nations are effectively trapped in this inescapable iron cage of competition.
He calls this framework offensive realism. Now, the absolute key word to remember here is structural. You see, offensive realism doesn't point the finger at human nature. It doesn't blame a specific country's culture, and it doesn't blame wicked dictators who just want to take over the world. Rather, it argues that the architecture of the international system itself literally forces states to behave aggressively. Great powers maximize their power not because they're bloodthirsty, but because it is literally the only logical way to guarantee their own absolute survival. It's a game of survival, plain and simple.
Okay, so this structural theory is built on 5 bedrock assumptions. Let's walk through them. First up, the international system is anarchic. Now, that doesn't mean it's chaos in the streets, it just means there's no supreme global authority. There's no global 911 you can call if your country is attacked. Second, states always have some offensive military capability. They have the physical tools to hurt each other. Third, intentions are always uncertain. You can never be 100% sure that your peaceful neighbor today won't become your worst enemy tomorrow. Fourth, the primary goal of any state is sheer survival. And fifth, states are rational actors. They think strategically about how to stay alive.
When you throw all 5 of those assumptions into a blender, man, you get a highly dangerous brew. In an anarchic, self-helped world, God helps those who help themselves. Because you can never be certain of another country's intentions, and because no higher power is going to magically swoop down to save you, fear becomes the absolute baseline of all international relations. So how do you fix that gnawing, constant fear? By amassing as much power as humanly possible. Because if you are the biggest, toughest guy on the block, nobody is going to dare pick a fight with you. And this leads us straight into what political scientists call the security dilemma, which is just genuinely tragic. Imagine State A wants nothing but peace, okay? So it builds up its military strictly for defense. But because intentions are unknowable, State B looks over the fence at those new weapons and gets absolutely terrified. To ensure its own survival, State B starts building up its military. Well, State A sees that, gets scared, and builds even more. It is an endless, escalating cycle of competition, sparked entirely by a mutual desire to just survive. Purely defensive actions inherently terrify your rivals.
So, if accumulating power is your only ticket to safety, the ultimate goal has to be hegemony, total dominance. But we need to make a really important distinction here between global hegemony and regional hegemony. According to Mearsheimer, true global hegemony, meaning one country ruling the entire planet, is virtually impossible. The absolute best a great power can ever hope for is regional hegemony. That means dominating your distinct geographic area, like Europe, Asia, or the Western Hemisphere, so completely that you don't have any peer competitors nearby.
Why is taking over the whole globe impossible? Simple. The stopping power of water. Oceans are massive, incredibly effective barriers. It is logistically staggering to project huge land armies across global oceans to conquer and occupy another great power's territory. Water literally prevents states from conquering distant regions. Therefore, locking down your own backyard, becoming a regional hegemon, becomes the ultimate realistic goal for any survival-focused great power.
Now you might be wondering, has anyone actually pulled this off? The most successful example in modern history is actually the United States. Think back to North America around the year 1800. The US was this vulnerable young nation totally surrounded by the British, Spanish, French, and Russian empires. But over the 19th century, driven by that ruthless logic of survival we just talked about, the US expanded westward. It pushed European powers out with the Monroe Doctrine, and it conquered vast territories. They didn't do this just to be malicious, they did it to secure their borders. And by 1900, the US achieved something totally unprecedented. It became the only successful regional hegemon in modern history.
All right, so what happens when a country in another part of the world tries to do exactly what the US did? When a potential hegemon rises up, other states have to react to survive. They usually choose between two strategies: balancing or buck passing. Balancing means stepping up, confronting the rising threat directly, forming alliances and building up your military to contain them. Buck passing, on the other hand, means sitting on the sidelines. It's crossing your fingers and hoping another nation will spend its own blood and treasure to stop the aggressor. Naturally, states love to pass the buck because it's cheaper and way less deadly. But man, is it incredibly risky.
This brings us to the concept of the offshore balancer. How does a state that has already achieved regional hegemony behave? Well, a reigning hegemon like the United States absolutely does not want a peer competitor rising up in Europe or Asia. But instead of immediately rushing troops across the ocean, they prefer to pass the buck to the local powers in those regions. They sit back, watch from afar, staying offshore. They will only step in to fight if those local powers completely fail to contain the rising threat themselves.
Let's move into our next section, Great Powers in History, and take a look at the European tragedy.
When we apply this completely impartial, data-driven lens to the bloody conflicts of 20th century Europe, it is wild how perfectly this relentless pursuit of power predicts the world wars. The crucial starting point for spotting a threat is looking at latent power. Latent power basically means population and wealth, the raw ingredients you can forge into a massive military. By 1930, Germany held 33% of Europe's relative wealth. That vastly outstripped both the UK and France. This massive latent wealth made Germany a terrifying potential hegemon. Even before Hitler's military buildup really got going, the structural reality of Germany's economic dominance meant they had the unique capability to potentially overrun the entire European continent.
And that structurally terrifying reality paved the way for the disastrous timeline we call the interwar buck pass. As Germany began rearming, its rivals didn't immediately balance against it. Instead, they all tried to pass the buck. The UK was hoping France would handle it. France was hoping to push Hitler eastward toward the Soviet Union. The Soviet Union literally signed a pact with Germany, hoping Hitler would get bogged down fighting the British and French. Every single nation desperately hoped someone else would pay the horrible price to stop Nazi Germany. And they kept passing the buck until it was almost too late. And the offshore balancer, the United States, finally had to step in.
From the ashes of all that multipolar chaos emerged the Cold War. But here's a fascinating twist. Structurally speaking, the Cold War was actually much more stable. Why? Because the system became bipolar. After World War II, there were only two superpowers left standing, the United States and the Soviet Union. In a bipolar world, there's literally no one left to pass the buck to. The US and the USSR had to balance directly against each other. So while it was a terrifying era to live through, this intense, direct balancing, combined with the extreme deterrent of nuclear weapons, is actually what prevented a Third World War.
Let's just pause here and look at a quote from Mearsheimer for a second. The ultimate aim is to gain a position of dominant power over others, because having dominant power is the best means to ensure one's own survival. This is the cold, analytical heart of this entire framework. The empires that expanded, the crazy arms races, the brutal conflicts, these aren't simply the result of irrational warmongering. Under the lens of offensive realism, they are rational, albeit deeply tragic actions. They are driven by the inescapable necessity of survival in a completely unforgiving system.
All right, let's bring this into the present day. We're looking at the future of global power and offensive realism today.
When we apply this framework to our world right now, one defining story immediately emerges: the rise of China. Remember, the fundamental structure of the international system, the anarchy, the uncertainty, the basic survival instinct, none of that has changed. Looking neutrally through Mearsheimer's structural lens, China's immense population and explosive economic wealth granted staggering latent power. Just as the US did back in the 19th century, a rational, increasingly powerful China is going to naturally seek regional hegemony in Asia to guarantee its own absolute security. And following that exact same logic, the United States, acting as the offshore balancer, is going to view a peer competitor in Asia as a massive structural threat and will seek to contain it. The theory predicts intense, enduring security competition, completely independent of whoever happens to be sitting in office in Washington or Beijing.
Which leaves us staring down a final, truly profound question.
Is lasting peace actually possible, or is great power competition just our enduring reality? If the tragedy of great power politics is literally built into the very architecture of the world stage, then perhaps conflict isn't a glitch in the system. Maybe it is the system. Thank you so much for joining me on this deep dive today. Keep questioning the invisible structures around you, and I will see you in the next explainer.